Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. It's been quite a busy week for me, that's why I'm coming to you only now, but this week was quite intense for the Ukrainian defenders. We start off with the situation on the Kherson front line. In this Kherson area, I've noted last week that what was happening is Russians have been preparing the counter-force push against Ukrainians. So they prepared the scaled operations, prepared forces for this, and they counterattacked specifically around the area south of Krynki, if you remember correctly. We did establish that Ukraine was controlling the village of Krynki, and it also moved southwards to try to get to this road. It ended up also factually breaking this road connection for the Russians. And since then, Russians counterattacked on Ukrainian positions here. So what happened is that once Russians counterattacked, they were able to gain certain ground right away. It was confirmed by the videos where we saw certain Ukrainian troops being captured, certain Ukrainian positions being overtaken by Russians. But since then, situation went extremely downhill for Russians. Firstly, Ukrainians started concentrating a lot of effort specifically on these attacking groups. Secondly, a lot of these groups have shown to be having really poor cohesion. So the theory that I hear about is that because there were no available free units to be sent to this direction, there were troops that were sent to this direction were either semi-trained or semi-coherent, so they were mixed and matched into some kind of a new regiments or units. And these newer regiments or units supposedly were sent here to supplement the efforts to take the Ukrainian positions out of here. And it ended up completely backfiring because some of the units ran. What Ukrainians did is they saw some of the units, maybe intelligence, maybe something else, and they say, aha, there were units approaching our positions, let's concentrate our fire on them as much as we can. And Ukrainians tried to absolutely diminish specific parts of the units that were attacking towards the Ukrainian positions. That doesn't mean that other units just had a free roam. No, I mean just the massive specific fire was targeting. And these units ran, which completely broke down the whole plan that Russians were having because they just started having holes in their attacking formations, and Ukrainians were able to establish forces, which ended up in a complete hilarity because all of the Russian propagandists, all of the Russian media started making up stories on why Ukrainian forces, despite this plan by General Teplinsky, is still failing, and it culminated with I cannot even express in direct words how silly it sounds, but basically what they stated is that we cannot really defeat Ukrainians here because they are using too small groups to dominate in the area, so they are too sparsely located, so our fire that we're firing on them is ineffective. Basically, if you dropped all of the BS, they're saying there are too few Ukrainians here, that's why we cannot take them out. Which is, you're very welcome to laugh at these statements, and I'm pretty sure everyone else on Ukrainian sides are laughing. So that's the situation. Moreover, it's important, after this failed Russian assault, we got a confirmed expansion of specifically Krynki bridgehead in this area. We now got a full-blown confirmation that it's very steadily expanded towards the western side, which is an interesting development. Again, so far, if we believe the Russians, there are very few Ukrainians on that side, but they're doing a great job. And another argument that I want to tackle, some people were mentioning in their analysis that they opened topographic maps of the area and said, well, you know, Russians don't really have to kind of defend this area too much because they have like a higher ground which goes over here. So yeah, it's fine if they don't really defend this area, if they just defend the higher ground. What we need to understand that this area is flat as a pancake. What people would see by looking at a topographic map here, if I just pull it up there, you will see that while it might show that, hey, wow, look, high ground. Wow, okay, so Russia is just going to control the high ground. What they're meaning by high ground here is just a difference between 10 meters and like 30 meters. So it's a steady, slow elevation up to 30 to 40 meters. It's not a massive cliff. It's not like a massive hill. It's just a little bit of a high ground. It's still a benefit for the Russians. I'm just stating that it's nothing that is a complete game changer in this region. Then we move to Robotyne axis. To Robotyne axis, again, Ukrainians here are not dedicating a lot of efforts, and what is happening is exactly what I told you, that Ukrainians will have a tactical operations in this area. They will try to dislodge Russians by taking out certain positions, and Ukrainians are, which is specifically, let's be very clear. I do say that Ukrainians have failed in their summer offensive, but it's mostly due to the political and the social perception of the event, rather than compared to what Ukraine achieved on the ground. Robotyne as a position to hold in, as a position to have a further plans to advance southward, is a pretty good point. Ukrainians improved their positions that they had before to now be prepared for the winter in quite a very nicely fortified area around Robotyne. And since then, there has been confirmed reports that Ukrainians have indeed taken some tactical efforts to reach towards Kopany, and it's happening. I'm just reporting here sorry, on certain successes. But again, this is small. This is not something that we want to look at. Ukraine right now, as I said, is in a strategic defense. So most likely, any kind of gains that Ukraine will gain, minus maybe Kherson area, is going to be very insignificant. So if you don't see Ukrainians just recapturing big swaths of lands, don't be surprised. It's by design. Then we move to the area around Avdiivka. Here, the situation is difficult, but situation is not critical. One thing that I want you all to understand, in warfare, in general in war, there is no technically position that cannot be captured. The question is always how much resources and how much casualties are you willing to take in order to overcome the enemy defenses. Having a completely impenetrable defenses is quite a challenge. For example, I am pretty sure that Ukraine could have moved south of Robotyne during their summer offensive if they would be agreed to sacrifice another 100,000-200,000 Ukrainians. And I'm pretty sure they were not ready for this. This is not the same for Russians, because Russians are playing on a political stage, and this is where certain gains of Russians are being represented. Avdiivka is an important stronghold in the area. I explained this a lot. It's more important than Bahmut was. And important here for us to understand is that even if Avdiivka is captured, this is not the end of the world, right? It's all about the question of price. For example, now some of the Russians or pro-Russian shills are looking at Bahmut and saying, oh my God, Avdiivka is looking more and more like Bahmut. And it's like, but that's not good. Like, that's not good. Bahmut was terrible for Russians. It was completely atrocious what happened. I'll remind you that the end of capturing of Bahmut ended up with a potential for a coup in Russia. It didn't play out, but there was still a lot of dissatisfaction. It ended up with Wagner, supposedly the most dedicated offensive Russian unit, ceasing to exist. So right now, Russians are sending in their troops, they're sending in their reinforcements, they're still having possibilities to capture Avdiivka. It's just a matter of the costs. I want us to be very, very clear on this, that Avdiivka is not an impenetrable forces. It's a fortress, but it's not impenetrable. And Russians have been having certain tactical successes, mostly moving up north along the railway and moving towards Stepove has been happening, but they were also pushed back. So I cannot say that they have established themselves close to Stepove. Mostly it's them trying to establish positions, but then Ukrainians are counterattacking them. It's a bloody mess. It's a real bloody fight. Everyone is expecting when Russia is going to make another massive push with armor, but so far they are not controlling it. And if we're talking about the whole fortification of Avdiivka falling, then we need to understand there are certain strategical positions that needs to be taken for Russians before Avdiivka becomes in danger. For a longer time, I told you that Bahmut is fine, and then I said at some point I will tell you Bahmut is not fine, and then I told you that Bahmut was not fine, but Ukrainians still kept defending it. Good it or bad, I don't know, but so far Avdiivka is doing fine. This is all fine because strategic positions are Orlivka, Russians are not even close to there, and the chemical plant over here in this area, where again Russians cannot even approach the chemical plant. So far Ukrainian forces are kicking them out, even trying to come close to it. Therefore, right now Avdiivka and strategic important positions around Avdiivka are well defended. There has been a little bit of a movement of Russians south of Avdiivka in this direction, but first and foremost, this movement is not as massive as some of the Russians are claiming. And secondly, we again hear a lot of disarray in the Russian media. A lot of these, let's put it this way. So a lot of the Russian Telegram channels and this media correspondence, war correspondence, they can be separated in like relatively three categories, broadly. The first one is Russian Ministry of Defense and associated channels, which is a complete fantasy world that has little to no things in common with reality. It's the same people that are claiming that they have destroyed 38 Ukrainian planes in 1 month. It's the same people that are already almost capturing Kyiv. Again, it's completely without any touch to reality. It's a complete joke. We should ignore those, and that's why I get really, really triggered when someone starts quoting some of these fantasy things. Then the second one is so-called like home-sitting correspondence or pro-war channels. These guys are more like myself, except they are deluded and thinking that Russia is great, and they are analyzing data that is available from open sources and twisting and turning it to make sure that it fits the Russian narrative. However, they're still in touch with reality. These are the guys that are looking at the map and seeing, oh, Russia gained some tactical positions in this area, that's it. So they will open the map and then they draw like a big red arrow here, then they draw a big red arrow here, then they draw a big red arrow here, and they say, aha, so Ukraine is about to get encircled, it's just a matter of time. And then there are the third group. And the third group is the reporters from the front lines. They are still completely deluded, but at least they are also filtering a lot of that information because they're talking with the real military personnel, they're talking with real people on the front lines, and they're seeing the situation. And what happened is that this second group and the first group, the Russian Ministry of Defense, were projecting their fantasy perspective on Avdiivka incredibly. It started with the first assault of Avdiivka when they started saying, oh my God, Avdiivka is going to get already captured, like Ukrainians are pretty much encircled, you know, you remember the maps from like Rybar or something else. And they were instantly already showing that like Russians are already controlling something like this area, that the southern position is already crumbling for Ukrainians, stuff like that. And it all like, then they needed to kind of like, you know, backpedal. And it's like, okay, maybe not, maybe not, maybe not. And now Russians are having some small tactical successes that do not really advance them much further towards strategic goals, as I explained. Then they are looking at this and it's like, aha, so Russia took a little bit of a time and they are still coming back to that original plan. And then these pro-war correspondents from the ground, they're saying, the more fatter the arrows you're drawing does not make the offense more successful. So they're stating that every meter that Russians are passing are actually paid in a lot of blood, which is true, and they are stating that, well, it's actually not as clear as, for example, the maps are telling. When you just paint certain maps red, doesn't mean that we're stating there. So they are reality checking. So the point is, a lot of these homebrew map drawers, they are wrong about the actual situation on the front line, and they just don't want to admit it because it doesn't fit their propaganda narratives. Bahmut operation, I believe around Bahmut right now, Russians are attacking. Some analysts are speculating that Russia is just going all in, that right now they have received orders to try to dislodge Ukrainian forces, to get as much pressure on Ukrainian sides wherever possible. I explained that it might be due to the fact that Ukraine is not being supplied with all of the ammunition and weapons that it needs, that they're feeling that Ukrainians are close to exhaustion. But what it means also is that Russians are exhausting themselves. They are exhausting their forces in an incredible level. This has already backfired significantly in the northern area, where Russians tried to do massive attacks. They got completely decimated, and since then Ukrainians actually have been improving certain positions. All in all, the front line is very, very, very intense. There are certain places where things are really, really hot, but the forces on both sides are holding. Ukraine is in strategic defense. Remember, whatever happens, Ukraine still has reserves. We know that for a fact. So right now, Russians are nowhere close on taking anything that can even remotely impact this war's outcome. So for now, we are where we are, and we're hoping things will change with the additional deliveries of weapons and equipment to Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching this. I have more things to say. Unfortunately, I don't have time to edit today, so we'll have to do more videos in the coming week. I love you all. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you guys next time.